In a library in Manchester, there is a scrap of papyrus about the size of a credit card. It is torn on every edge. There are a few lines of Greek on the front, and a few more on the back. It does not look like much. So take a guess at what it is. A shopping list, which is what most surviving papyrus turns out to be. A tax receipt? Or the oldest known fragment of the New Testament? Hold your answer. It is a piece of the Gospel of John, part of the trial of Jesus before Pilate, and it is usually dated to the first half of the 2nd century, which puts it within a few generations of the events it describes. The date is argued over, but nobody argues it is late. Which raises the question this whole film is about. There is no original. Not one page written by any biblical author survives anywhere on earth. So how did we get from that to the book on your shelf? The answer is a chain of hands. Thousands of people across roughly 3,000 years copying by hand in candlelight, one letter at a time. And the astonishing thing is not that errors crept in. It is how few did. Thought at the beginning, and the beginning is not writing. It is speech. Stories, laws, and songs held in memory and recited aloud in a culture that trained memory the way we train reading. When it was written down, it went on to what was available. Papyrus, made from a reed hammered into sheets, and parchment, made from animal skin, scraped and stretched and dried until it took ink. Both of them rot. Papyrus survives only where it is bone dry, which is why nearly everything we have comes out of Egypt or the desert. In a damp climate, the entire history of the book would simply have dissolved. So every generation faced the same problem. The scroll you own is dying. If you want the text to exist in 100 years, somebody has to copy it out by hand completely without introducing mistakes. And in Jewish tradition, that job became a discipline of terrifying precision. The scribes who standardized the Hebrew text are called the Masoretes, and they worked for centuries. They counted things. The number of words in a book, the number of letters. They identified the middle word and the middle letter of the whole Torah and wrote it in the margin so that a copy could be checked mechanically. Get to the end count, and if the middle letter is not where it should be, you have made an error somewhere, so you find it. That is not reverence as a feeling. That is reverence as an engineering process. And for a long time, we could not test how well it had worked, because our oldest complete Hebrew manuscripts were from around 1,000 years after Christ. There was simply nothing older to compare them to. Then came the caves by the Dead Sea in 1947, and a jump of 1,000 years backwards in a single decade. And the great scroll of Isaiah could be laid beside the medieval text and read side by side. The differences are real, and they are almost entirely trivial. Spelling, word order. 1,000 years of hand copying, and the book is essentially the book. That is the strongest evidence we have that the chain held. Meanwhile, the Greek side of the story starts earlier than most people expect. Around the 3rd century before Christ, in Alexandria, the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek for Jews who no longer spoke Hebrew. That translation is called the Septuagint, from a legend that 72 scholars produced it. Treat the legend loosely, but the translation is real, it is old, and it is what many New Testament writers quote from. Then, the New Testament itself, written in Greek in the 1st century, on papyrus, and copied immediately because the letters were being passed around between churches faster than anybody could control. And that is why we now have something no other ancient book comes close to. Roughly 5,800 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, plus many thousands more in other languages. For comparison, most classical works survive in a few dozen copies, the earliest of them written 1,000 years after the author died. By the standards of ancient literature, this is an embarrassment of riches. But riches bring a problem, and honest people say so. If you have thousands of handmade copies, they will not agree perfectly. Compare them all, and you find something like 400,000 differences. That number sounds devastating until you look at what the differences are. The overwhelming majority are spelling, word order, an article, a name written twice, trivia, noise from tired hands in bad light. A small number matter more, and the honest thing is to name them rather than bury them. Two are famous: the longer ending of Mark and the story of the woman caught in adultery in John. Blacked out. Both are missing from our earliest and best manuscripts, which is why your Bible almost certainly has a footnote, or brackets, or a line of small print at those exact places. That footnote is not a scandal. It is the system working. Because the way we know those passages are late is precisely that the manuscripts were counted, compared, and disagreed with each other in public. Nobody hid the evidence. The evidence is the method. Then the book began to move between languages. Jerome spent decades translating into Latin, the everyday language of the Western Empire, and produced a version that dominated Europe for 1,000 years. And that is where a problem grew quietly. Latin stopped being everybody's language and became the professional's language. The book was still being read aloud in church, and most people in the room could no longer understand a word of it. In England, in the late 1300s, followers of John Wycliffe translated the whole Bible into English taught by hand. A complete copy took months of work and cost roughly what a laborer earned in a year. Owning one became dangerous. Reading it aloud in English became evidence against you. It is worth sitting with that. The fight was not over whether the book was true, but over who was allowed to read it. Then the machine arrived. Around 1455, in Mainz, Johannes Gutenberg printed a Bible with movable type. Not the first book he printed, but the one that changed the arithmetic of everything. A scribe copying by hand produced perhaps one Bible a year. A press could produce hundreds. And the price of a book began to fall towards something an ordinary household might one day afford. And once printing existed, translating became unstoppable. Which brings us to the most stubborn man in this story. William Tyndale wanted an English Bible translated from Greek and Hebrew, not from Latin. He was refused permission, left England, and printed it abroad anyway. Copies were smuggled back in bales of cloth. They were seized and burned publicly. He kept printing. In 1536, he was betrayed, tried, strangled, and burned at the stake. He was 30-something years old, and his crime was translating a book into the language people spoke. And here is the part that ought to be better known. When the King James translators sat down 75 years later, they leaned on Tyndale so heavily that a large share of the New Testament they published is his wording, almost unchanged. So the man executed for the translation ended up writing much of the version that was read in English churches for 300 years. Phrases you know by heart are his. He simply never got to see it. Now, the honest part, because this story is often told too smoothly. The printed Greek text those translators used was itself hurried. Erasmus assembled his edition in a rush in 1516 from a handful of late manuscripts. For the last few verses of Revelation, he did not have Greek at all. So he translated backwards from Latin to Greek, inventing readings that appear in no Greek manuscript anywhere. Some of them are still printed today. None of that is hidden. It is documented, argued about in public, and corrected in modern editions, because the discipline that produced it is the same discipline that catches it. And that is really the whole point. This is not a book that dropped out of the sky, sealed. It is a book that was carried by hand through fire and empires and bad translations and worse politics by people who kept counting the letters. So when you pick one up, you are holding the far end of a chain. Thousands of copyists. A scrap in Manchester. Scrolls in a cave. A man who died rather than stop translating. A press in Mainz, Dutch. Almost none of them are named. Almost all of them are anonymous, and most of them did the work badly paid, half-blind in bad light, for somebody they would never meet. And the book got through. Not because it was protected from scrutiny, but because it survived it. That is a stranger and better story than the one where it simply appears.